Welcome to the Two Blokes Chatting radio show on 94.7 The Pulse. Music, interviews, news, and, well, two blokes chatting. Now, here are the two blokes.
And sometimes you pull a guest that can only be described as royalty, and we have got Pulse royalty with us this morning. Mitchell Dye, host of Mitchell's Front Page on a Monday and a Tuesday morning. Good morning to you, young man.
Good morning to you both, Rob and Neil, and just take it a bit easy with some of the words you throw around. I can handle the occasional compliment, but that's probably a bit too far.
All right, well, let me throw this one at you. I absolutely blame you.
For?
Oh.
This morning, what was the weather forecast meant to be this morning? Nice sunny day, you know. I wake up, it's raining. I'm thinking to myself, someone out there has selfishly gone and washed their car yesterday. How do you plead, Mitchell?
Yeah, couldn't have picked a worse day. It's going to be sunny and 30 degrees today, and they've revised that right down, haven't they? It's always when you wash your car.
Yeah, well, someone does, yeah. So thanks for doing that, because my car is now dirty because it's got dust all over it. Thanks.
Sorry, I'll try harder next time.
Thank you very much. On a serious note, Rob and I were talking during the week about this whole Facebook news thing that if you read the commentary that's going on, it seems to me that most people's opinions are based very much on whether they hate one side of Parliament or the other, as per my long run earlier. So we thought we need someone who's sensible and knows what's going on, and we thought there's nobody that we know better than you to give us some idea of what it all means. What's going on, and then what it all means.
Well, my thought on it is that we're really caught in a massive negotiation between Facebook and the government, and it's a real shame that we end up getting caught in the crossfire when we don't really have any power to change the situation. So we know the government's proposed this new legislation, which is to try and raise money to subsidise print journalism and other forms of journalism. And Facebook and Google don't like it because they think it's going to fundamentally change the internet. So the government hasn't really been willing to back down, and we've heard Facebook and Google complain. And we all remember when we've gone searching and watching videos on YouTube and those big alert messages have come up. So that's their side of the bargain. Now Facebook's decided to take it to the next level by, I suppose, throwing in a strong-arm tactic and saying, well, this is what the internet could look like if we banned all Australian news from our platform. And it's really interesting to see what people think about it. As a result, some people are happy that their news feed doesn't have any news in it, whereas I'm probably a little bit more disappointed. I think the news aspect, when that's gone, all you're really left with is people sharing photos of their pets, their children, and what they're eating.
Mitch, just to explain to the listeners the difference in the two platforms of Google and Facebook, because the government strong-armed Google and they strong-armed back, but 3 days later they were involved in discussions with Nine News and News Corp on contracts to supply news. So clearly they understood the importance of accessing news and hopefully understanding the need to reward good journalism. But what is the difference between Google's business model to Facebook's, where they have a different attitude to it?
Yeah, well, Google's business model is centered around search. So you go there, you type in something, and then search results come up. So the news service on Google works quite well if you go to Google and type in a breaking news story, whereas Facebook's model is more around using their service for free and then selling ads to that person. Google does that as well, but Facebook is really centered around keeping things free, and I don't think people in Facebook would be prepared to pay any sort of subscription service to access the news. So with Facebook, you're scrolling through your news feed. You're not really going to Facebook to search anything in particular. So people have been saying to me, why do people get their news from Facebook? I think most people don't. You know, if you've heard of a big news story breaking, you don't go and type it into Facebook, but it's normally as people are scrolling through their news feed, they see all sorts of different things, and news is one of those. So I can see Facebook being more reticent to bring about this sort of model that Google's brought in, which I think Google is calling it News Showcase, and it's sort of a different way of displaying the news than their traditional search. But Facebook, I think, definitely wouldn't be happy to do that. They'd rather keep with their existing model because, let's face it, the Facebook model works very well. A lot of people use it, and it gets people hooked in.
I think the other thing too that I've, in terms of how I pick up particularly local news stories. There's a couple of other radio stations in Geelong, apparently, that are down in Moorabool Street. And
Really? Are you sure about that?
so someone told me about it the other day, and those stations, I think it's fairly clear that K-Rock and 93 point whatever it is Bay are both owned by the same group. So I think that's quite open knowledge in town. They will put a story on Facebook which basically says, there's a car accident on the Barwon Heads Road at wherever, click here for more information. So they're using it as clickbait in a way, the news service. Presumably that would now stop.
Oh, absolutely. And not just them using it as clickbait. Everyone uses it as clickbait. And we're actually having this conversation on The Pulse yesterday during our 11 on Friday program. But a lot of the news services like the Geelong Advertiser and other News Corp publications are putting up clickbait-type articles. But then when you click on the article, it only leads you to a paywall, and then you've got to actually be a subscriber if you want to go any further. So some people aren't happy about that either, and they're saying, well, maybe now it's a good thing that we've lost all of this clickbait from the site. But you're right. I think those news publishers really did rely a lot on Facebook to drive the traffic back to their business. And I'm already seeing reports this morning that a lot of them have seen a decline in traffic as a result of what Facebook has done.
And I only chose those two as examples, obviously, but the other one that you mentioned, there's a newspaper in town as well, owned by News Corp. And one of the things I had a crack at it during my long run earlier is someone the other day in this whole I'm just going to make a stupid comment because I hate one side of politics or the other. Apparently, this entire thing is being driven by Rupert Murdoch.
Well, I think the concern is that the government's legislation favours bigger publishers, and when you think about Australia, there's not really that many big publishers, is there? So they seem to think that it's going to favour Rupert Murdoch because it means that more people, well, Facebook and Google will be subsidising more of Rupert Murdoch's publications, and it's going to be a nice revenue stream for them because they're the biggest media players in town. It may work like that, but at the end of the day, I'm not too keen on the government's legislation either, not from a political aspect, but just because I think it does break how the internet fundamentally works. I think we've got to distinguish between links, where someone clicks on a link, and these sites like Facebook and Google showing full extracts of articles, which of course they probably should then pay for because it would potentially violate copyright. But I think it's a real problem with the internet and the way the internet works when you start to stop people from being able to link to news articles, and that's why Facebook and Google are jumping up and down, and they're probably fearing that other countries, if they see Australia do this, will bring this in as well. I think Canada is already talking about doing something similar. So that's in part why Google and Facebook are negotiating this quite hard, not because it would be problematic to their revenues here in Australia, but because there's a real risk with the slippery slope that other governments will say, this is a good idea, let's do it, and that will be a worldwide impact.
And the intrusion of advertising when you are doing these searches, I've noticed it's that thin edge of the wedge thing where they might have an ad around the story, and now the story is broken and paused with a 15-second ad in the middle of it, and then the story continues, and then 2 minutes later another ad will pop in. So it's just constantly at you. So the revenue streams available to the likes of Google and Facebook must be enormous.
Oh, they are absolutely massive. And I think they did a comparison on just how much revenue they make from the advertising side, and it was something like 70% of all online advertising spend in Australia goes to Google and Facebook, because people know if they want to grow their business, there's a huge audience out there on Facebook, and they've got very smart ways to target and find the right people, and the same with Google, because if something goes wrong in your house, the first thing you do is type into Google, I want to find a plumber or how to fix a blocked toilet. And then if they can put their ad right there on Google as people are searching for it, it's big business. So that's why they have heaps of revenue. And
for people like yourself and Neil who have little businesses or promoting the radio station, and to a lesser degree me, if you're offered the idea of boosting your profile, boosting your spread, but it comes at a cost to do that, so that's another potential revenue stream as always. Have you gone down that path to promote your radio show, Mitch?
I haven't really gone down the path to promote the radio show. Most of it's been organic. In other words, it's just been people finding it. But I have done it for businesses in the background. and it can work very effectively for local business if you set it up correctly, because, it is going specifically to the people that you want to target. So you can choose from a whole range of demographics and where people live, whereas a lot of advertising, like if you just put a big ad in the paper, you don't necessarily know exactly who's going to see that ad. Whereas on Facebook and Google, you can absolutely target the people that you want to see the ad like a laser, basically, and that's why it works so well.
Yeah, I was noticed with interest too, the gathering of that information is becoming more blatant and obvious when I sent or requested to put in a letter to the editor at the News Corp run Geelong Advertising, the information that they required of me to place that letter to the editor and suggesting that this information will be used to for advertisers to contact you. So they're building up that database, which would then do exactly as you said, allow businesses like you to target an audience very specifically.
Yeah, big data, that's the future, and that's why it's huge at the moment, and it's sort of perhaps moving a little bit away from the scope of this discussion about subsidising print journalism, but that brings in a whole debate about people's privacy and whether we actually like Facebook and Google, and that's perhaps a link back into this story, because a lot of people are saying, well, now we like Facebook less than what we used to because we think they've gone too far, and some of the other sites that aren't news-related have been caught up in the crossfire. For example, I think a homeless shelter got targeted. Their site got shut down by Facebook. The Bureau of Meteorology, the government department where they put out important weather alerts that we need to see, they got shut down. And I think even the Greens MP for Brisbane, Amy McMahon, she got her site shut down by Facebook. So a lot of people that aren't directly news services have got caught up in the crossfire here.
I know the VFL, Victorian Football League, page was shut down. I was actually a little bit offended because I have 12 Facebook pages and none of mine were shut down. And a couple of
not important enough.
a couple of them were allegedly news related. But I think the other thing too that I tend to my brain works on the basis that if 90% of the population are saying something, I tend to go, well, I want to know what the other 10% are thinking. So there seems to be this thing. Wind the clock back, Mitch. I know you're a bit younger than Rob and I.
Fraction, yep.
In fact, more than half, but that's okay. I'm thinking of Rob's age. Back in the olden days, I'd be sent up to the street on a Saturday morning with my 20 cents in my hand, and I would buy a copy of The Sun or The Age, and I would bring it home, and in effect, while I was paying a contribution towards the publishing of that particular newspaper, it wasn't cover all of it, obviously, because that's what advertising does. There are a number of people who get really grumpy on Facebook. Oh, yeah, well, this one's subscriber only. I think there's this idea that people think, well, now that it's online, it doesn't cost them any more, so why should I have to pay? Surely there needs to be some compensation to the journalists and the organisation that are providing those jobs and that service. I pay I think $20 a month for a subscription to the Herald Sun for two reasons. One, it's got the best footy coverage, and that's something that I'm interested in. And secondly, it covers the Addy as well. That cost me less than $1 a day. I don't have a problem with paying that money when I would be paying $2, whatever it is, to buy a copy of the printed version. Surely that's not unfair.
Probably not, because we do need to pay journalists, and when we pay journalists to get better stories, and particularly the more in-depth, expensive stories like the investigative journalism, whereas if you just have the cheapest possible journalism, it tends to be more print-release journalism, and therefore you don't really get the full story and you don't get all the angles of the story. So yes, we should be paying journalists. I think they're still struggling to find a model that actually works, though, because as you say, a lot of people aren't too keen on the paywall system. I know some people subscribe, and the Addy told me that their subscribers actually went up during COVID, so they've got more revenue coming in, which is probably a good thing for them. But yeah, I think they're still really fine-tuning that model. And at the end of the day, when you see a paywall, it's just too easy to find the stories for free from somewhere else, isn't it? So you could go to other certain media outlets, which you previously mentioned in this segment, that like to put up the same stories for free, because that's their business model, and there's all sorts of ways to Google things and find information for free. So this is the information age. There's no shortage of information available out there, and you can find most of it for free if you know what you're looking for. So if someone says, well, now we want to charge you for that, people are jumping up and down. So what is the right business model? It's very, very challenging to navigate.
And to be fair to both the Murdoch papers and the Age Sydney Morning Herald people, throughout the coronavirus crisis, all stories have been released as non-subscriber, which means you don't need to pay money to see those. And I think that's a really generous gesture made by those companies, given what we were going through at the time. I can't get my head around why people think they should get access to the Age or the Australian or the Herald Sun or whatever to some of the pay TV without paying money, or be surrounded by advertising. Someone's got to pay the bill.
And I think free-to-air TV, just on the TV point, is quite problematic, isn't it? Like, the quality of that seems to be going down and down, and now it seems to be the streaming services that are coming in to save the day. So it seems like people are happy to pay for the streaming services because they get better entertainment content, but maybe the paywall aspect is still being worked out. But in terms of the free stories during COVID, that was, I think, really just a PR thing, wasn't it?
Oh, no doubt in the world. But
gesture of goodwill. And look, the other thing is, I suppose it's not a great look to be profiting off saying, we've got this latest information about the virus, but we won't tell you unless you pay.
And in fact, it's normally $20 a month, but we're going to tell you where you can get your vaccine, so it's suddenly $50 a month. That would only happen if those rotten oil companies got involved, he said through gritted teeth.
That would so. I agree with that.
Mitch, it's always great to have a chat to you, but to be able to get you to provide a serious segment on this somewhat circus-related program has been most generous of you to give up your time. We want to know about your front page program. How can people listen to that, and when, and how can they know about it on social media?
Mondays and Tuesdays from 9 to 11 right here on the Pulse. So it's basically the same time slot that we're in now, just on a Monday and Tuesday. And you can get in touch just by searching for Mitchell's Front Page across Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or your favourite podcasting platform.
It is where the big guns are, isn't it? 9 till 11 on this station. Rob Cameron, of course, Wednesday and Thursday. And you did mention a program on a Friday, which you called something at 11. What time's that on?
Friday at 11, which surprisingly is at 11.
On
Friday.
Okay.
And straight after Dennis Scanlon's program, and it's me and two other people, Liz and Vic, and we sort of have similar but differing opinions on the issues of the day. So we just get together at 11 o'clock each Friday and our thoughts on all the issues of the week.
Mitch, perfect segue into my final question before you leave us. You work very, very hard at providing balance in your 4 hours of radio during the week, or 5 hours on a Friday. If Facebook win this battle, is balanced news in danger?
So if they win it, meaning what, they keep the news off Facebook forever?
Yeah, so they then control the news that goes on to Facebook.
Well, first of all, I don't think that they will keep the news off it forever, because I think there's too many people like me that like to see news on Facebook, and we're probably going to go to Facebook less. So this is just a negotiating tactic, I'm pretty sure. I'm fairly confident the news will be back on Facebook soon. But if the news was to be taken away, then I think it is disappointing, because I'm always someone, maybe a bit like Neil, that likes diversity in the media. I like to see both sides of the story, the left and the right, and everything in between. So if you start to block out certain aspects of the news on Facebook, then yeah, I think that's a loss for media diversity and people's ability to read from a number of different sources. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a bit of a concern. So hopefully, I agree with you. I think common sense will prevail, because I reckon both sides will see the need to do the right thing, and there will eventually be balance, because the money will dictate it. And if Facebook are losing users, they'll soon change their thinking, I reckon.
I think they will, absolutely. Just a negotiation. Hopefully it's sooner rather than later. Although I just wonder who's going to back down first. Will it be the government to say, we'll bring this legislation back to the drawing board? Because we're already talking yesterday about how Josh Frydenberg, the Treasurer, has been referring to Mark Zuckerberg as, Mark. He's on first-name terms. He's ringing Mark up every day. So we'll see how quickly this comes about. And will Facebook buckle first and bring back news, or will it be the government that wants to change the legislation? We'll see.
Sounds good to me. Mitch, thanks for joining us on your day off, and we'll look forward to hearing you at... I was going to say next time we hear you is going to be at 9 o'clock on Monday morning. That's not true, because I've just seen what the next cart is, and it's for our friends at Deesa Garden.
Oh, wonderful people at Deesa. So, yeah, you'll hear me then, and then again on Monday, 9 o'clock.
Thanks, Mitch. Thanks for joining us.
Good on you. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Mitch.
See you, mate.